So what's interesting these days, guys, is that the metronome as a tool for tempo reconstruction, historical tempo reconstruction, if you will, is more and more the last 5, 10 years, 15 years perhaps, more and more on the table of discussion. We had a time in the previous century where metronome marks were just ignored massively when you would ask people like Brendel, and other pianists or musicologists. Temperley, for instance, is also a very famous example. They would just flat out ignore the metronome and say like, it's ridiculous, the metronome was broken, what have you, and so on and so on. But that position, of course, in this more than half a century long tradition now of historically informed performance practice, it's no longer attainable because tempo is the foundation of an interpretation, and certainly seen the importance in history given to the metronome by composers for the simple reason that they were no longer the sole interpreters of their work. Also, notation became more and more complex. That, of course, is an awareness that is no longer neglectable. And so you all know we struggle with metronome marks because in modern reading, they are oftentimes too fast, too ridiculously fast, too really unplayable at all. And so I came across a video, a documentary where Sarah Willis, who is also a professional musician, but also a TV presentatrice, we say in Dutch. So in this interviewing a lot of people around a Beethoven project, as also she is talking to the famous conductor, Paavo Järvi. I don't know if I pronounce his name correct. Järvi. He is a conductor from Estonian birth, and so he's still living there. He has a foundation. It's very active. He conducted all the 9 symphonies and many other works. So he's also presented in this documentary as one of the world's leading conductors, and probably he is. And so this is a fragment I want to share with you because you hear a conductor talk about Beethoven's metronome marks. There is a lot that we can discuss about it, but I suggest we first listen to the fragment and then I come back to break it down.
He published the metronome markings probably because he wanted to make sure that people are in the right area of tempi. And of course, so much controversy is to this day around these metronome markings, and the main problem really is that they are very fast. A lot of them are much faster than the traditional Beethoven interpretation that we know now are comfortable with. And in a way, I think that that's exactly why he published them, because he sort of could foresee that things would get slower, more romantic. You know, there is a kind of a slowing down, the grandness, the Wagner effect, if you will.
So here you have someone who is obviously dealing or diving into Beethoven's music from the perspective of the metronome marks. And of all those years of study, rehearsing, recording, the best explanation you can come up with is Beethoven gave very fast metronome marks because he foresaw this tradition of Wagner, where Wagner, by the way, that's a fairy tale, but that's what we think today. Wagner romanticized the entire 19th century, and romanticized means slow down. And so there Beethoven, he gave metronome marks that we think are too fast, and they probably are too fast. That's, I believe what he is saying between the lines. And the reason is, he just overreached in his in his speed, so that by the end, if you are in the area of the tempo, he suggested you are closer to his intention than when you would follow this romantic tradition that was introduced by Wagner. I mean, I have no words for this to start with. And then you see Sarah Willis. I mean, I think she even played in the Berliner Philharmoniker. nothing better you can come up with? This genius, Beethoven, who didn't give precise metronome marks, didn't use the metronome as it was, the reason why it was invented, like to give precise tempi, and he just overreached in his metronome marks. And yet, we think today, yeah, that's what he wanted, that's what he meant, because he foresaw Wagner coming. I mean, if you are in a documentary like this, with an influence on an audience, both of them I'm actually criticizing here very hard, you must know that what you are going to say has an influence on the people who actually see you as an authoritative voice. And so my first question would be, if I were in the position of Sarah Willis, can you give me one quote, one single quote out of the 19th century, and not necessarily even in Beethoven's time, but yeah, why not? Where you can actually prove your point that tempi in the 19th century went down instead of increased. There is not a single line saying that. The idea also that in the entire 19th century, where everything evolved to louder, faster, there was an expansion of technology, but only in music we declined. We can no longer do what people early in the 19th century actually intended to do, and for a mysterious reason on their, let's be honest, more primitive instruments. I'm not saying worse instruments because they are magnificent, I'm playing on them as well, but technically they are in the process of being involved, certainly in terms of, if I speak for my area piano, that those people could do on those instruments what we somehow in less than 10 centuries just lost. Well, genetically that's not possible. The human race is not changing that rapidly. So there is in the entire 19th century a tendency, and it's so well documented, of tempi that went up. Virtuoso players came. They took music written by others, music written in the past, and they took it to a new stage with a new audience that expected them to just, play in a stunning way. And stunning meant loud, fast. That was it. And so there you have the metronome marks that Beethoven foresaw all of that coming and overreached. It's actually impossible. It blows my mind that in this serious interview setting with a reach to people where you should know, listen, I have an influence, I'm going to teach people what my opinion is, that's the best you can invent. And by the way, it's very ironic because in this clip, you see the conductor being announced as one of the, the conductors that take metronome marks seriously. Great. But then they give part of the 7th Symphony where his tempo is really fast. And you would say that's a single beat interpretation, modern reading interpretation. But it's actually 10 to 13 to 15% and sometimes slower than what Beethoven indicated. Of course, there is an outcome here. The conductor would say, I said, yeah, Beethoven is overreaching. He gives the area of the tempo. And so I'm a little bit slower. So within my own philosophy, I'm still fine. Except that's your own philosophy. There is nothing in the 19th century that backs you up for that. When Beethoven gave a metronome mark, like all the others, they gave a precise, exact tempo indication. And for many of these movements, by the way, that are problematic also for this conductor, they're not even on the edge of fast. I mean, how many presto and prestissimo movements do you have in the symphonies? Many movements, even with an allegro indication, turn out to be already impossible to play. And where you can of course turn the knob here, like also Gardner is doing sometimes. And when you slow down on his performances and you see what the orchestral people, the musicians in the orchestra, I should say, actually are playing, they make triplets out of 8th note 16ths and so on, and then not even reaching the tempo of Beethoven, then we have a problem. And the problem is, it's not explainable by just saying, yeah, Beethoven foresaw Wagner coming. No. By the way, Wagner was not a player particularly playing slow. He was criticized for his fast tempi. What happened with Wagner, but that's for another video. is that he suddenly met some people, for instance, Habeneck, the conductor in Paris, who had the name of being a slow conductor. Why? Not because, and that's interesting, and it's essential to see all these people that are criticizing the fast performances. They did not criticize the orchestras for playing fast. They criticized them for playing faster than intentionally was meant by the composer. That's of course the flip side. That's the reverse of what musicology makes of that. They say, when you read critiques in the 19th century of too rapid performances, they say, yeah, but those people who criticized the performances wanted in the realm of Wagner to slow down tempi. No, many of them, and I have brought sources in 1821 in London or Fink. Go on the channel and search for them, and we will make more. And the tempo book will have a lot more, I can promise you that. Those people who are criticizing those rapid performances, they criticized it because they remembered the original, the authentic tempi from the Viennese period or from earlier on to be much slower, and yet there the metronome marks are. And so pointing to a speed that is like beyond imagination. And so it's simply not true. It's factually not true that Beethoven gave metronome marks because he foresaw Wagner in the process of slowing down. And coming back on Wagner, he heard Habeneck playing slower, Habeneck having the name of still playing in a kind of old tradition with slower tempi. And of course, he would become familiar with Franz Liszt, who also, maybe not in his earlier years, but from the mid-30s onwards, there he started to really honor the tradition of Viennese tempi. He had the name of playing Beethoven slower in many instances than many of his colleagues. And so both Wagner and Liszt had the name, today have the name of slowing, having introduced this culture of really slow tempi, which is simply factually not true. What happened was that Wagner partially, I'm not saying Wagner was like a very authentic performer, but they just didn't refuse to go along with this like ridiculous new tradition of speeding up. Like, guys, you have to imagine in 10 or 15, the maximum 20 years, this whole evolution of speeding up tempi happened between 1810, 1815, 1830. By 1830 was already done. And so it's unbelievable that you see that. And then in the middle of that fragment gives a clip like showcasing that what's the problem. Even a conductor that is known to be in support of the metronome marks, great, works with them, have noticed, obviously, he must have noticed, obviously, that there is a problem. He takes slower tempi, not all of the symphonies, by the way, but there are several movements in the symphonies that are considerably slower. And 10% is a lot. I mean, 10%. Why would you not go on that tempo if that would be possible? And so when he says a lot of these tempi are much faster, that's the problem, than traditional Beethoven interpretations that we now are comfortable with. Well, yeah, I mean, why is that the problem? They are not problematic because we feel these tempi slower because of the traditional Beethoven performances. By the way, those traditional Beethoven performances are not that much slower than the recordings that we hear today by conductors that so-called claim that we follow the metronome marks in single beat. There is not so much difference. If you go back 1 century, perhaps, yeah, but the last 50 years, all Beethoven performances are way too fast. So it's not simply not true that that's the problem. The problem is that these metronome marks make no sense as a whole when you read them in the modern way. And so it's just stunning to me to see intelligent people, talented people. I mean, I'm not criticizing this conductor for being like not having an intellectual capacity to reflect on that. I would like to talk with him and people like him, maybe in private, because I can imagine the pressure of the system is so strong to not go in another direction. And on this, as we do on this channel, just revisiting the reading of that metronome marks, those metronome marks, not read them in a single beat way, like where every tick represents the note value in the metronome equation if you wish, where the full swing of the metronome, as is oftentimes actually also written in sources, is to be seen as the representation of the note values. You don't have tick, 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 you have tick, tick, tick. All the tempi suddenly work, all the tempi work in a stunning way. You hear Beethoven, by the way, announcing Wagner. Yes, but in his music. And aren't we proud, even today, that Beethoven was like the introduction composer of the Romantic style? Only when it comes to his tempi, he hated it. Like it's like, I have no words for this. So there is only one solution to the metronome marks, guys. If you accept them to be correct exact tempo indications, well, you have two solutions. You have the modern single beat way of reading them, and then a lot of them will be simply flat out impossible. Not even think you can try. And granted, orchestral musicians, they drive Ferrari instruments, if you compare it to a pianist. But even there are a lot of problems. Talk to musicians that play in orchestras on a professional level, and you will hear the stories. But on the piano level, even, I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces that no human being living today ever will be able to play. Never. We cannot play pieces up to 15, 16, 17, up to 25, even sometimes 30 notes a second. It's not possible. And so the other solution is just that you go to what we call the WBMP, the whole beat principle, where the two ticks together combine the definitions of define, so to say, the note value, like in the Renaissance time, where the tactus up, down, arsistes defined the semibreves and still was considered to be one beat. So there are a lot of videos on the channel. I don't have to repeat myself here. So I thought it was worth sharing with you this clip. And again, I'm criticizing really, really hard. I think that's obvious what the conductor here was saying, Paavo Järvi of Järvi. I'm really, really criticizing that, because when you go out in public and you don't know exactly what the reason is why something is not working or why something is not making sense to you, you should be honest about that. And what he should have been saying here is like, listen, some of these metronome marks, I don't understand them. But of course, it's not fashionable anymore. You cannot do that anymore in these days, because as I said at the beginning of the video, the last 20 years perhaps, you cannot do that anymore. There are important publishers today come with introductions into their Beethoven scores, and that's just the start. They will go to Schumann and they will go to Chopin, but because it's for all these composers the same thing, starting to reach out to their audiences with the published metronome marks, even by Karl Czerny. And that's a good thing, because that's the tradition of Beethoven. And so you can simply not say anymore, like, listen, I don't know what happens or what's wrong with these metronome marks. But if you don't have the guts to say that honestly, then say nothing. And concerning Sarah Willis, why didn't she ask the obvious follow-up question? Namely, did you have any problems with Beethoven's metronome marks yourself? Because the last 100 years, a lot of your colleagues had. And so then we would have an interesting conversation. And if the end conclusion would be like, I don't know what happened, that would be fine. Better admit not to know it than to just launch a fake solution that many people will take seriously because of your position. And so, guys, we are just a little channel here. We are just a few people that are working, also writing an insanely thick book of almost 750 pages right now, in which we have to just take you back to the 15th and 16th century, even to just close all the back doors, to just make you see, like, listen, there is no other solution, and the history is backing us up for that. Maybe things will change, maybe not, and I would be more than happy to talk to Paavo Järvi about this in the most friendly way. There are no enemies here. There are no black and whites, no positive and no negatives. There's only one, or we should have only one thing in common. That's go after the truth. What did Beethoven really had in mind? Okay, that was it for today. If you have clips or videos or articles that you think is of my interest, just email me them. or link them in the description box here. If you link a video, it will disappear because of YouTube's policy. They don't allow a lot of, links into the comment section, but we have some people who are diving into those rejected comments as well, so we'll find it back. And then I will come back to that if it's of general interest in the things that we do. Okay, there you have it. Thanks for watching, and we see each other soon again.